But yeah, thanks so much for joining. I hope you all are having a fantastic Galaxy experience so far. I know I personally have already learned a lot, and it's been an awesome day. Today with us, we have Emmelyn Wang from AWS, a global leader for DevOps and AWS Marketplace. Emmelyn, you had some awesome facts that I hope you're okay with me sharing, because I always love painting a picture around the folks and humanizing them that are speaking. But yeah, so one thing that kind of stood out to me was that you've run 3 triathlons. That is 3 more than I've done. So kudos there. And I thought it was cool. You might touch on, I'm sure touch on your background a bit more, but excuse me. Thought it was really cool. You have 10 plus years in the space in various roles as a stakeholder, API docs and program manager, business development leader, and a Postman user, right? So I think the combination of all of those lend itself super well to an interesting talk, and can't wait. And if you don't know by now, hopefully, for the folks that are here, this session is why APIs call for, I don't know how you want to say, 2x the DevOps. But yeah, basically easier, faster ways to build, test, and adopt APIs using Postman and AWS together.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm joined by my colleague Subu, and feel free to make this conversational, ask questions during the talk. So yes, my name is Emmelyn, and I'm sitting here physically in Texas. If you want to continue this conversation, I'm on Twitter at LifeWingmate. You can also reach me at the API Ops community Slack, where there are other AWS and Postman folks as well. So I'm a huge fan of the show Hilda. There's 2 series. It's on Netflix, so likely you might catch some references throughout my talk. Today, we are going to cover, why, 2 times the DevOps. Like, what does that mean? And, why is that good, right? And then how to do it. And so today, we're going to talk about how DevOps relates to APIs. So an API is a contract between the provider and the consumer. An API built for integration, for example, is an indication of the stakeholders involved and what it takes to build APIs that they not only need, but want. And APIs built in and for the cloud and hybrid scenarios really mean that you have a shared responsibility, right? So that comes with design and also security. And have you ever wondered why misuse of the API means that it gets a bad rap? So let's really think about the reputation of the API before we ever start to code. And on my side, I'm actually trying to make sure the animations are going, hence kind of moving around here. So today we'll cover best practices of API ops and DevOps. Like, what are they first? Why and how do you go faster when you shift from a monolithic to microservices architecture, and how that relates to your DevOps practice. And you can try these practices today, right? So these practices are tool neutral. However, Postman and Amazon do have an integration, right? So we've got at least one of them, and there are several more, the API gateway integration. So let's talk a little bit about why DevOps and API ops works well. So API ops is openly licensed.
Emmelyn, it looks like you got muted. I'm not sure quite how, so I just don't want anybody to miss anything.
Great. Thank you so much for telling me.
Yep, it was like 5 seconds ago, so I tried to catch you before you went too long.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So I'll jump into a little bit about why DevOps and API ops cycles matters, what it is, and some of those best practices. So the ultimate goal of modern application development is to automate and abstract away as much as possible so customers and businesses can actually focus on building applications to solve problems rather than focusing on infrastructure, right? And so let's look into that. So customers want to rapidly solve and innovate by trying ideas so they can quickly respond to feedback about how well the ideas solve the business problems, right? We saw this just last year, how quickly people were able to innovate. And everyone is now expecting that application development means adding new features. And because there's limited resources, we really need to rely on this innovative flywheel of experimentation. So meaning you want to experiment as much as possible, right? And you can do that in Postman today, and That's fantastic. This model or approach is actually very different than what we've been seeing. So if many of you have watched Hilda, and this doesn't give away any spoilers of the show, she carries around a sketchbook, right? So I actually, drew this high-level abstraction to help you understand, right? Today we think of API ops cycles and DevOps cycles. And just because you need more of them, notice how the cycles get smaller and your velocity gets faster. And you might say, okay, what's the alternative? Well, what I've seen over the years is if you quickly expose an API in the code, then what happens is, say, a developer, architect, or product manager might not be able to explain why that API was created, right? Even if it's got a story ticket, it's in the agile lifecycle. They can't explain what it does, and then what happens is the API consumer has a less than ideal experience. So we should really talk about how to prevent that. So at a high level, DevOps is the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases an organization's ability to deliver applications and services at high velocity, evolving and improving products at a faster pace than organizations using traditional software development and infrastructure management practices. And so this process actually allows organizations to better serve their customers and compete more effectively in the market. And I can give you some real world examples as we dive deeper into how does DevOps relate to APIs. So on the left side, there's the depiction of monolithic applications. So what it is it's usually a large application, and it does everything. Right? And you have a single release pipeline with rigid scaling. So the problem there is, you have to be able to scale the entire application together. And the impact of the change is very high because you're having to debug and deploy the entire application's millions of lines of millions of lines of source code. And a change that you think is going to break the application somewhere might actually impact an application in another part. So an example I can give you is when I worked at UShip, right? The CTO started coding the application when he was in college, and he had to, scale that application and grow it, right? It was very much a monolithic application. And so it was really interesting because by the time I joined the company, we already had APIs to serve iOS and Android teams, internal applications, partners. And so we really had to then shift over to this microservices architecture. The other piece I was going to mention that's really difficult on the monolithic application side is how hard it is to adopt new technologies, including purpose-built technologies. So say you start an application and there's a relational database as the backend, but you want to be able to use a NoSQL database for some other purpose within the application, right? Well, if you have a monolithic application, it's just way too risky to do that. However, if you have a microservices architecture, so each one of these circles represents a service, and each one of the services does one thing, and it does it very well. So, for example, calculating shipping or taxes. And each one of them can be scaled independently. You can make changes and the impact is small. You can make changes often. You can also use, purpose-built technology, which is really exciting. So we're going to make the comparison again and now tie it to application development lifecycle. So in a monolithic development lifecycle, right, everyone's contributing to this large application. And typically what you saw was a single flow, right? There's a delivery and test cycle, and maybe you would have releases of features on a yearly basis, quarterly, semi-annual. And that's really, like we talked about the flywheel earlier, just unacceptable to wait for features to get out, right? Especially in the time right now we have where we have to innovate literally to help each other. And so it was also very complex to deploy. And so that's why, with microservices development lifecycle, each component has its own lifecycle. And as long as the service is available, and since microservices are a contract which provide a standard, as long as that service is available, then they can deploy when they need to. And so, that's just one of the many benefits of that lifecycle when you have a microservices architecture. So tying this APIs back into DevOps, right? So before Amazon in 2001, right, they needed to make a change because they had monolithic application and the teams to match. And in general, just outside of Amazon, we really saw developers, you might, check in your code and kind of throw it over the wall, right? And then developers and operation, that it just was really, there was a lot of friction. So DevOps is all about removing that friction and working together as one. It's a change in mindset, and both teams now have end-to-end ownership. Plus, with this sort of decentralized microservices architecture, you're now able to move a lot faster. So anyway, before DevOps at Amazon, we really saw productivity dropping because there was a lot of manual time spent just on state changes, right? So changing things from dev to test, and a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting. So other DevOps practices that are just incredibly important that have to do, with microservices is communication and collaboration, continuous integration, continuous delivery, infrastructure as code, monitoring and logging. And I'll touch on these in the next set. So here's that slide I talked about how, we had to transform our own culture. And the way we did that was with two pizza teams. So two pizza teams is just a concept that says it's a team that's small enough to where it can go quickly, right, to create those microservices, and they can be fed by two pizzas. And the other piece that's very interesting, especially when it comes to the cloud and AWS, is, can you actually apply standard DevOps practices in, in the world of serverless and modern application development? The answer is absolutely yes. So here's some of the best practices. Treat your infrastructure the way you treat your code. Set up an automated integration and deployment pipeline, and build in monitoring and observability from day one. And I'll explain why. So if any of these pieces are an afterthought, it just really becomes very difficult to go quickly, right, from design to deployment. Also, you want to consider API security upfront. Remember how we talked about this is a shared responsibility? If you don't know what APIs you have, so typically, even companies that say, oh, we only have internal APIs, right? Well, they still may have hundreds or maybe even thousands of APIs. And that's really important, like I talked about in the beginning, where think about the reputation of the API, right? If you need to know what you have to be able to secure it. Also, you want to think about how your consumers are going to use your API. And that's important to have, that conversation, because you don't want to duplicate your efforts. And you also want to understand the fact that, hey, you need to inspect the API traffic, because your consumers will most likely consume your API in new and wonderful ways that you may not have thought of. And so this leads me into API ops, right? Since I talked about it earlier. So here's the story of API ops. So, main disclaimer, right? API ops is a community project. So it's not, officially or, legally endorsed by AWS or Amazon. However, what's amazing is practitioners are using it every day. And here's the story. So computer scientist Marjukka Niinola, she's based in Finland, she had been developing APIs for 30 years. And over time, she became an API product manager, a CEO, an author. She kept getting the same questions over and over. What are the best API design practices, et cetera. And because of her extensive foundation in lean and agile development and DevOps practices to remove waste from the API lifecycle, and actually building what customers need and want, she actually developed this methodology and gave it to the community. So it has a Creative Commons license, and it's practiced by developers, architects, and leaders all over the world, and both commercial and public sector can use it. So last November, I started writing this presentation, and we've, since grown from the numbers that you see on the screen here. I run the API Ops meetup in Dallas. And what we do is we use the frameworks, the templates, the questions, and the methodology of the API ops cycle. And that it shows that, of course, right, okay, you may have input and collaboration in 2 trips around the DevOps InfiniBand, but you're actually accelerating the entire process. And I'll dig into why. So architects, so back in the day, you know, when we were meeting in the conference room and actually able to whiteboard, so typically architects, you know, we love to just jump into, okay, I know I'm building a chatbot, you know, I'm designing an API. What's amazing is API ops causes you to step back, and this counterintuition to focus on what the API consumer wants without even thinking of it as an API first produces architecture that considers how to handle trade-offs better and upfront, which is very exciting. And the lesson for developers, right, who are also using this methodology. So last year we participated in in several hackathons to try to you know, improve people's lives during COVID, right? And so what's really exciting is we were able to use the API ops methodology in one hackathon and quickly transition to another hackathon and group that was that was going to continue that project. And what was amazing there was the first set of developers were very well versed in like mobile app development, whereas the second set of developers wanted to create an IoT device, and they were more versed in, you know, kind of back-end development. And so that we used the API ops methodology to, you know, to hand that project over so they could continue hacking. And then the most important lesson for product leaders. So today, product leaders, likely your product portfolio might also include an API, right? So for example, AWS Marketplace product leaders, you know, we have at least, you know, a dozen sets of APIs that we offer to sellers in the marketplace. And the reason I mention why this is important is, in general, when product leaders treat their APIs as products, you can better get the resources you need so that you can design those APIs up front, and so you can create APIs that are, you know, really going to be useful to who's consuming them. And so finally, some of my takeaways are start with what the consumer wants or needs before jumping, you know, to code. And you can use that using the API ops methodology. So they basically use several different templates and ways of working, just like DevOps, so that business and developers and IT can work together to, you know, design a fantastic API. And then here's a litmus test. So you need to be able to ask, right, as part of your retro, can everyone upstream and downstream describe what the API does and why? 2, how painful is it to document the API, which leads me to the last key litmus test question is, how delightful is it to consume your API with no internal knowledge? And that's really important, right? So one of the APIs that I documented is published on Postman. It's called the Deltek Vantage Point API. And you know, it was really interesting, right? Because I basically got to work with both Postman and Deltek to, you know, talk to all the different stakeholders to make sure that the documentation that's publicly available actually helped them complete their integrations. And so I'm going to open it up to questions. If, you know, anyone already has any, my apologies, I was looking, you know, at the slide, so I couldn't see the chat box. And then if Subu's available to join, he is an expert in security as well and can answer any deeper questions about that. He also has many years of experience working with AWS customers in case you need more stories. So yeah, I just appreciate everyone, and you know, let me know that if you have any questions about the presentation.
Awesome. So Emily, that was fantastic. And hey, Sabu, welcome. Glad you were able to get in. Sorry about the technical difficulties. You Yeah, so there's a question in the chat or in the Slido. So I'm happy to read it, and if you all want to give it an answer or tag team, whatever works best for you. Cool. So how do you feel about BFF pattern, and who do you think should own the BFF?
Sure. And can we get a little more context? And Subu, let me know if you want to answer, or if you need me to, or.
Yeah. So I think a little more context would help. I think you're referring to. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure first you can hear me okay. Okay.
Very
Perfect.
clear.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I think here in this case you're referring to the backend for front-end pattern. Is that what you're referring to, or you're saying something else here? Trevor, I think there's a question from Trevor here.
So yeah, it looks like in the main chat now. So he said yes.
Okay. I think it's so the architectural patterns or software development patterns kind of evolve as you start to build applications. If you noticed in one of the slides that Emmelyn pointed out, in the microservices model, depending on the type of applications that you use, quite often the patterns may change. One thing we noticed is we don't quite prescribe that this is the best pattern that you have to follow. Again, this is where you can choose the pattern that works for you. That's one of the DevOps philosophies that we strictly follow as well. We don't stick to one tools or technology, and ability to be agile, ability to change patterns, is quite often works very well. So yeah, I think this definitely needs a lot more detailed conversation, especially going down the technical patterns and implementations. Maybe I can follow up with you. Me and Emily can follow up with you some detailed topics on how to choose the right pattern.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking through the other question here from Thomas. Will the presentation be available for download as PDF? I'm actually not sure on that.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the recording and the slides will be available. And Sean, thank you, so much for helping with that too.
Cool. Yeah, of course. It feels funny to be thanked after saying I don't know, but but yeah, no. I knew the sessions would be available. I wasn't sure about the slide and the deck themselves. That's cool. That's good to know. What else, folks? We've got a few more minutes. If any other questions come up, we've got a great opportunity to take advantage of some real experts here.
Yeah, especially since we've got very deep security knowledge too from Subu. He's spoken at reInvent and works with a lot of the vendors, because there's quite a bit of overlap, I think, when it comes to API microservices and security. Yeah, and also if anyone has any questions about AWS Marketplace, or any of our APIs, just mentioning that we follow these best practices, and AWS Marketplace is one of the almost 200 AWS services, right? So just mentioning that, highlighting one.
Yeah, so I do see a question from Stephen around interconnectivity issues and changes in deployments. So I think I'm just going to read the question for everyone's benefit. I can easily see the use cases where a change from one may still affect something else. What is the best practice around their interconnectivity? So let me just first answer to this question. I also see one more question is coming in here. Again, this is where I don't want to use. I'm a consultant. I come from the consulting world. Like Emmelyn pointed out, I used to support a bunch of AWS customers when I was a part of AWS ProServe, and it really depends on the type of architecture that you have and the type of application that you have as well. Again, this is where quite often you may have to wear the SRE hat to figure out how the reliability of the application is impacted. The connectivity between the APIs and the data plays a key role here. One of the biggest recommendations that I received when I started in the early stages is to make sure you have a proper data structure defined and how each microservices are well defined. So you really have to tie yourself with a strong data expert who knows how to define this, so that each of these microservices can function autonomously and don't get into some downstream impact later on when you try to change something. And in addition to that, the process plays a key role. This is where when you have proper environment segregation, one of the common mistakes I've seen personally in the DevOps world is when people think when they're moving from a waterfall to DevOps, they try to throw away this idea of having multiple environments, like starting from dev, UAT staging, and production. I think those principles should continue to follow, so that when you're trying to push a change, you test it in a UAT environment. So if something breaks, you catch it ahead of time and then move it to prod. That's a common mistake I'm seeing with my customers. Again, this is a lot more detailed question, so it may need some detailed conversation there. Maybe I can take one more question. I think we have 2 more minutes left. Sean, is it okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. How do you handle PII security concerns as AWS when creating APIs concerning cloud versus on-prem?
Good one.
Yeah. So PII, personally identifiable information. I think this is where compliance plays a key role. For example, number one, with any application, you have to break the security and compliance as 2 separate kind of domains. So compliance may be a regional compliance. Let's say you are using a data that resides in California, then you may fall under California compliance. Or if you are having PII data with European regulations, then you may have to follow those GDPR or European compliance. So the compliance totally depends on data residency requirements, as well as where the data is actually originating from. So those things will come in factor. So in that case, my quick answer is you have to work with the compliance experts to find out what are the regional requirements based on the type of data that you use. What are the compliance requirements? Just because you pointed out PII, it quite often ties back to the regional and local requirements. If it's PCI, obviously you know that that's payment card standards come in play, or health HIPAA standards come in play for health data. Again, speaking of AWS, we have a number of best practice documents that's publicly available as blogs as well as white papers that talks about how to manage sensitive data in the cloud. So maybe you feel free to follow up. We can share some best practice blogs and white papers to you.
Awesome. Yeah, glad. I'm happy some questions came in there at the end. It seemed like right when we were getting cooking, we ought to cut it off here. But yeah, I think that's about time. Emmelyn, Subbu, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I hope people do. Yeah, I know AWS is a sponsor, so I know there's a keynote tomorrow. So I'm sure people can ping you guys and get some more information, follow up with some of the questions they had. And yeah, I hope you'll join us in the next session. It's a keynote from Kroger.
Awesome.
But yeah, so thank you so much. And I think that's all for now. And I'll see you all in the next thing.
So
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Subbu.
Bye all.
Bye.